Thank you, everybody.
Hi, thank you for joining License Global today for our webinar series, License Global Live. Today, we have a wonderful session in store for you. It answers the age-old question, what exactly do licensees want? Today, we have a panel of best-in-class U.S. licensees that will explore trends in the space, but also we're going to talk about things like shedding the traditional license agreement or maybe even purchasing the brand. Joining the panel today are Cindy Levitt of Mad Engine, Michael Rinsler of Jazzwares, Julie Boylan from Spin Master, Vincent Nessie of Icarus Capital Group, and the session will be moderated by Stephen Heller of the Brand Liaison. This session, as always, is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's session or the speakers and share the webinar via social media outlets or participate in the Q&A session, which takes place at the end of the presentation. Lastly, if you're experiencing any issues, type your question into that Q&A box or reach into that help widget and reach out, and somebody will be there to assist you right away. Thank you so much for joining our webinar and enjoy.
Wow. Welcome to another What Do Licensees Want webinar. This is actually the third What Do Licensees webinars that I'm doing in a series. And in the past, if you've listened to us, you know we've covered things like royalties and guaranteed minimum royalties and GMS, GMR, marketing commitments and deal terms, and of course, retailer support, all the things that licensees would want. But I'm really excited for today's webinar because this one's going to be very different. Over the past couple of years, including pre-pandemic and even through the pandemic, we've been continuously asked by our licensee clients to help them find brands and full businesses to purchase. In fact, just look at the extensive consolidation on the brand side and on the licensee side, but look at the number of mergers, companies, and brands being purchased, like last week's Reebok announcement, for example. But we have lots more examples to share with you today, especially on this panel. I'm going to be very proud to bring you Cindy Levitt from Mad Engine. Mad Engine has acquired brands like LRG and Neff Headwear and full companies like Mighty Fine and Fifth Sun. Unfortunately, Chris Volpe couldn't make it with us today with United Legwear, but he's been on some of our other panels, so you know United Legwear acquired Pro Player, Avalanche, and a significant stake in the Hurley brand. On the toy side, I'm really proud to introduce Julie Boylan from Spin Master that acquired Gund and Cardinal Games, and Rubik's Cube we'll talk about today. And my friend Michael Rinsler from Jazzwares, who acquired Kelly Toys and its leading property, Squishmallows. But Jazzwares also acquired Russ Berry and First Act and so many more. In fact, and this is great, Michael's company, Wicked Cool Toys, was actually purchased by Jazzwares. They kept Michael on, and now he's the executive vice president. So Michael brings a very unique perspective from both the seller side and the buyer side. And last, and perhaps the most sought after participant on this whole panel, Vinny Nessie of Icarus Capital. And Vinny brings a unique perspective about purchasing and licensing brands as his company develops strategies for acquiring brands, partnering with the acquirers, licensing out those brands, and Vinny creates some very advantageous funding structures as well. And Vinny has a career in brand acquisitions with companies like Authentic Brands Group and Iconics, where he was an executive vice president. And for me, at Brand Liaison, we're constantly being asked by our clients, what brands can they buy? What brands are available? In fact, we currently have at least 3 clients actively looking for augmentive business opportunities. We know a couple of very strong brands that are available for sale, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let our panel tell you, what do licensees want and why do they want to own the brand? So let's start with Cindy and Mad Engine. Cindy, 2 brands that I love. tell us a little about your acquisitions of LRG and Neff. How did those deals come about, and why those brands?
So our company is always looking to diversify. We all remember we all know the peaks and valleys in good content years from licensing and kind of slow content years. And then with many of us battling for the same slots at mid-tier mass and pretty much all retail with the big licenses, we really started to look for how to diversify what we do. So Neff and LRG were the first two, and those two were done specifically to reach a different customer we weren't reaching in the street brands with LRG, or street customer, and then also the fun and active with Neff. And we thought it would be a great idea to find brands that were very forward trend looking so that we could then bring that and arch that over into our regular licensing for mid-tier and mass and regular retail. But specifically, we wanted forward thinking, trend right brands that we could bring in-house pretty, they weren't so big, they were big enough that they had a following, and really to work with those, not only to bring them out as a standalone brand and integrate them in different tiers of retail, but to also do collabs that we don't have to pay double royalties on. So when we do a LRG or a Neff collab, we're really still paying one royalty. So there is a big advantage of that too. So that's specifically.
Can you give an example of some of those collabs?
We just did a massive Minecraft collab with Neff where we rented a truck and skinned a truck and did pop-up shops. We did Black Panther when it came out with LRG. We had marketing beats throughout the year. We just did this really cool Barbie and Ken one with Neff that was all like swimming and fun in the sun. We pretty much always have a Disney one going every other quarter. So, and it seems like there's a lot of the licensors are very interested in doing these collabs, so much so that we have to really say no to a lot so that we don't oversaturate. So it's a big advantage with licensors.
Yeah, collaborations are fun. And we're going to get into a little bit more of the detail, but what parts of the business, when you did these acquisitions, what parts of the business did you look to integrate into your existing infrastructure, and what parts of your business did you look to add outbound licensing?
Good question. So we took the back office, integrated that right away. There was such a savings, and made economic sense to do production, shipping, receiving, accounting, royalty payments. Everything was completely integrated very quickly back end. What stayed separate was the front end, with the sales and design teams remaining separate so that we could still not lose the identity of the companies and some of the key talent that came with those companies, because we really needed to keep the DNA of those. So it's kind of a natural to just integrate the back end very quickly. And what was the second part of that question?
What part, and then what parts did you look
outbound.
Really outbound licensing?
Yeah, that's we have only put our toe in the water with that, but we're really making an effort as our brand business and brand division expands. We're looking to really start doing a lot of more important outbound licensing, things that we don't produce, like maybe furniture, paint, prescription eyewear. So that's the part that we can, it's a kind of a no-brainer on some of our brands, like Neff Eyewear would be amazing. So, but it's something that we kind of had to kind of just get everything going and COVID hit, but it is a kind of a big objective going forward with our, as our brand division expands.
I know a great licensing agency that could help you with some of that.
Okay, good.
Let's turn to Michael Rins, and everybody calls him Rins. So let's look at Jazzwares. In 2019, Jazzwares purchased your company, Wicked Cool Toys. They've since purchased Kelly Toys. I mentioned Squishmallows. And I think even prior to you, they bought the First Act instrument company. You bring a unique perspective as both the buyer side and the seller side. First, Michael, tell us, how did that whole Wicked Cool Jazzwares deal come about?
Sure. I think I could do a full hour on this, but I'll try to be succinct. So first off, I think I have to just give a little credit to how I met the Zaberskis. We were Judd and Laura, the CEO and president of Jazzwares. So 3 days after I started Wicked Cool, it was June 15th, 2012, we were introduced by a very close mutual friend, Jennifer Richmond, may she rest in peace. And that started this friendship with the Zaberskis. And fast forward 7 years later to July of 2019, it was Comic-Con, and I had, basically Judd had been a mentor to me along the way. There's not many people who own toy companies, right, that you could go to and say, hey, I need some advice. And so it was Comic-Con. My partners and I were looking to do a deal if the time was right. I went to Judd and said, what do you think? You guys want to buy us? And he said, no, but I will help you find somebody. I said, great. So we hired our banker, who I'll also give a shout out, Rod Rosenfeld from Baird Capital, who was fantastic. And we had our first meetings on July 6th. About 3 days before that, our banker called Allegheny Capital, who is the majority owner of Jazzwares, and said, why don't you just meet these guys? Come on in. And so we met. July 6th was the first day I had ever met them. Judd didn't even come. Laura didn't even come because they already knew us. We signed, I guess, an LOI a few weeks later and closed the deal. And hopefully we'll have more time to talk about this later on October 1st. So met August 6th and closed the deal on October 1st. And, it was just a very crazy and amazing time. But it all worked out. We had several different offers, but I'm sure we'll get more into why we ended up with Jazzwares. But Allegheny Capital, just a tremendous private equity partner, and very different from a lot of people out there, which we could spend some time on.
That one seemed to happen lightning fast. Since you've been with Jazzwares, or through your prior experience, is that typical?
I would say no, at least not that fast. 6 weeks from meeting to closing is very unusual. But I think, one, it definitely helped that we had a pre-existing relationship, right, with the Zaberskis, where we knew each other, and there was a trust level there. So I think a lot of the due diligence, where typically maybe you would dive in a lot deeper, we were able to bypass some of it. But there was also a team of people on both sides, that worked 100+ hours a week for those 6 weeks. We set a deadline and we wanted to meet that deadline, and we were able to work together to pull it off.
And obviously they kept you and Jeremy, and even expanded your role now with the company. Tell us about what you're doing at Jazzwares now and what you guys look for in acquisitions generally. No secrets, just generally.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I think Cindy talked a little bit about a company they had bought where they integrated a lot of things, immediately. And, for us, it was a similar thing. Our businesses were similar in that we had a lot of great licensed brands that we had worked on, and a lot of, overlap. So we integrated fairly quickly. We kept all of our people. And as a matter of fact, a lot of our top people are leading, big divisions now at Jazzwares. But specifically, my partner, Jeremy Padawer, he's overseeing brand marketing, and very heavily involved on the licensing side of the business. And for those of you who see him on social media, he's quite amazing in that space. And for me, I've taken a lead role on the M&A side and also the innovation side of our business. So, Jazzwares has obviously been growing very quickly, and we've built an inventor relations group internally, which is terrific. That also includes developing new IP and also content development. A lot of people probably saw that we're working with CAA now on Squishmallow entertainment type of deals. That's my focus. And then, and also I oversee the pet and costume divisions, which are also new to Jazzwares as we continue to expand and grow. And then our other main partner is heading up all of manufacturing in China, Thomas Poon. So it's really been a nice blend that isn't always easy to pull off. And I think you have one last piece.
I'm sorry?
Oh, you said the last piece, you asked what do we look for in deals, right? So, I mean, I think we've got some kind of basic general parameters in terms of size of companies that we look for. So typically now, we're looking for companies that are doing 10 plus million in EBITDA, which doesn't mean we would never do a deal smaller, but generally speaking, that's what we look for. And then we tend to look for companies that, are growing rather than declining. And there's pros and cons to both sides, but we look for companies that tend to be growing. And then we look for companies that have great people, because again, our strategy is to keep the people, right? And 1 + 1 = 3, so to speak. And again, like we haven't ever had, knock on wood, a layoff when we bought a company where we got rid of people. But
well, they found
Yeah.
great people in you and Jeremy, and it's not just in toys, right? You mentioned now you have a pet division, and I know about a costume division that I read about recently.
Yeah, correct. And look, when you have a great investing partner like Allegheny Capital, and just to speak a little about them. So, they're not a typical private equity, chew you up, spit you out kind of investing partner. They really are more like a Berkshire Hathaway, where they look to buy and hold for 20 plus years. They've been around so long, they trade under the best ticker symbol ever, in my opinion. It's just the letter Y on the New York Stock Exchange. But yeah, I mean, they've been, just tremendous to work with, and they're very open to, building a very large global company. And toys obviously is our main category, but we're going to look to apply our skill set and our knowledge in consumer products across a variety of different categories. Great
story, and congrats on all the success. And staying in the toy world, let's hear a little bit from Julie. I love your company as well. Let's talk about Spin Master. Julie, tell us about what things you guys have acquired over the last 3, 4, 5 years, and then we'll get into a little more detail.
Sure. Well, look, many people know Spin Master has acquired a great number of brands and companies over the past, several years. It very much shows the entrepreneurship of the DNA of our company. I think I do also want to just preface with saying that I am only a cog in the wheel. So I am not directly involved in acquisitions at Spin Master, but again, one of the lines of business in which we look at as we acquire both companies and brands. But I think as we go throughout the webinar today, I will use Rubik's Cube as really the prime example. We acquired in January of this year. And, the key at Spin is about innovation. And what we felt like that this really was a marquee of innovation on our entire portfolio, and gives us the ability to develop new toys and games, and then also look at what is really a great opportunity for additional outbound licensing than from what Rubik's had done previously. So in general, for Spin Master, we look at opportunities to grow and diversify our portfolio. That really is the first part of the strategy. And so other examples that I can just touch on are, Cardinal Games, which really strengthened our award-winning, games portfolio that we already had in place, as well as the acquisition of Gun, which allowed us to enter into the plush business. So with all of these acquisitions, we tapped into their established reputation and legacy, and we were able to drive future growth, leveraging, our well-established global infrastructure, which is also key for us.
It's great. You mentioned growth and diversity, 2 key things. My next question was going to be, what are the criteria that you look for? But I guess growth and diversity are two great examples you gave.
Yeah, but it's also like, for instance, on Rubik's, games is a very strategic focus for us. And, because Rubik's is such an evergreen brand with 98% global awareness, it really provides, reoccurring revenue opportunities and the opportunities for us to further innovate and integrate, into our product lineup. So, there's so many things that go into, acquiring a business, and certainly those are some of the tops, and also international. International is a real driving force for our company because we have offices all over the world. So we really are looking for global opportunities, or at least opportunities internationally that we feel can strongly grow into North America, or vice versa.
Really good, and especially with Rubik's. By the way, I just want to say, I know people are putting questions into the question box. We see them. We are going to get to all the Q&A, so save your questions or pop them in, and I'll definitely see them. The Rubik's, and I've seen some interesting things. How much are you doing, Julie, with Rubik's in outbound licensing, or Cindy mentioned collaborations? What are you doing with Rubik's and outbound licensing and collabs?
So, one of the things was, one of the first things we did once we acquired the brand is we really looked what it had done historically. And, looking at, from a licensing opportunity, what had been previously done, what worked, what didn't work, and where we felt like the opportunities that were missing. So, for us, the acquisition was very timely from a licensing standpoint because Rubik celebrates its 50th anniversary in 2024. So it really does allow us that, longer lead time to look at collaborations and to look at partnerships, that are really going to promote the 50th anniversary, and then give us a real story to look at what categories we feel are going to have the strongest opportunity for long-term outbound licensing.
Great. And then we're going to get into, in a few minutes, structure and how to pull the trigger. But I want to get Vinny in here for a minute, because I think I said, Vinny, you're going to be the most popular guy after this webinar. Tell us, what is Icarus Capital, and what do you guys look for in clients and in targets?
Sure. So what we are is we're a bit of a hybrid. So we're basically an investment banking tool for buyers and sellers to utilize, a little less intense than a JP Morgan or someone who's looking for giant retainers and the rest of it. Not that we don't like retainers, but we are able to identify a few types of assets. We deal in the distressed assets, so we deal directly with the banks that are handling the distress, of whatever they've credited towards these operating companies. We deal with brands that have lost maybe some relevance but have heritage, which you really can't buy. Heritage, you can't create it. You have to acquire it. And then finally, we deal with licensing. Our model, having worked at Authentic Brands and at Iconics, was to acquire intellectual property and operating companies and convert them into what we call more of an asset-light strategy, which would push out the traditional operating costs, risks, and expenses, and create a more predictable and stable model based on expert licensees in their respective categories and territories. And we then get, visibility for our lenders, for our investors, on predictable revenue, because there's guarantees every quarter or every year over long periods of time. And instead of having to go into different retail or into different categories or territories where we might not have the expertise, we choose to pick the best-in-class operators within those different spheres of expertise. And without having to risk our capital, call up our investors for capital calls, et cetera, we leverage on their operating businesses to take on the sourcing, design, sales, production, and all of those relevant buckets. And it really does streamline the businesses. We also do quite a bit these days of just straight investment banking, where there's a lot of operators domestically and also in Asia and internationally who are looking to acquire brands that they would plug into their supply chain or into their model. And we help them not only to acquire them, but then to strategize on the rest of the world.
So sometimes you'll work with an operating company, like the three we've spoken with already, to buy a brand and integrate it. And then sometimes you mentioned just buying it, keeping it asset light, buying the IP and then licensing it out across multiple categories. Vinny, I think I know the answer, but do you ever license it back to the company that sold it or owned it?
Yes. So an example of that would have been, I guess, Buffalo Jeans when we were at Iconics. The family had a very successful denim business that had been there for years. There was nothing wrong with it. They were looking for a liquidity event. So we came in and we partnered with the family, the Baton family. They stayed on as the core licensee, and they owned half approximately. So they were paying themselves royalty as well as us. And in those instances, it becomes very interesting because they tapped into our expertise as well as our money of licensing around the world into different categories, which benefited them. And for us, they were able to pay premium rates and really cut the learning curve because they were an owner, not just an operator.
And that's a really interesting way that you structured that because, like you said, sometimes you look for distressed companies to do that same model. Those companies might need the capital. With Buffalo, you said they didn't need it, but they were looking to tap into your expertise and a liquidity event. What are the differences of the investor risks when dealing with a IP company versus an operating company?
Sure. So an operating company that's successful
and
generally—
you use the term, you and I speak often, you use the term IPCO and OPCO, OPCO or IPCO. Explain those terms too.
Sure. An OPCO is an operating company that handles all aspects of the business. So they're responsible for the maintenance of the trademarks down to the sourcing of the trims on the product, importing, tariffs, duties, returns, all of those wonderful things that OPCOs deal with. As an investor, the average OPCO kicks off around 5 to 10% EBITDA contribution model if they're profitable. I know there's some that are higher, but they're more the exception than the rule. Whereas the average intellectual property holding company kicks off north of 50% EBITDA contribution model. So there's a great difference. Now, again, you're dealing with operating margins, which are a little wider because you're getting the benefit of selling something possibly for wholesale to someone, who's a retailer. So there's higher initial gross margins and larger dollar numbers, but it's filled with risk. When you're looking at the asset light or the IPCO model, it's not that it's risk-free, but it is de-risked because all of those operating expenses and capital requirements have been migrated out to the partners. And really the expenses come down to legal, marketing, and supervision of the brand. So that's why we're able to reach margins, EBITDA margins of north of 50%. And again, as I said before, lenders are much more open to investing and backing these kind of acquisitions because they appreciate the predictable cash flow that we get from licensing agreements. And net asset value of the acquired IP goes up substantially higher because the revenue that's streaming into the IP holders is at a much higher multiple because there's less risk and it's more predictable. So what we see as a difference is an average OPCO that's pretty healthy is getting maybe 4 to 6 times their EBITDA as a valuation, where a successful IPCO is right now going between 8 to 13 times in the market. So there's a big difference there on the return.
And that's why they trade at these high numbers, but a company then, so what you would look for, and my next question for everybody is what do you guys look for? What you would look for then is a company with really strong IP. You mentioned heritage brands that you could trade on those multiples, even if you license it back to the original operating company.
Yes. And, in the instance of a lot of operating companies will come to us and say, we're looking for a brand in a certain space. We'll find the brand for them, buy it with them, help them finance it through other investors if they need it and fixed debt. But they then have that to plug into their infrastructure. We can handle for them all of the other licensing opportunities and geographies. And they've picked up an accretive piece that's complementary as, they talked about before with Neff and LRG. Those were complementary to Mad Engine's portfolio. They weren't duplicative, so they fit right in.
Yeah, and we'll turn back to Cindy, but if Chris were here, he would tell this exact same story with what they did with both, I think, Avalanche and with Hurley. But Cindy, what are you guys looking for? How do you find your next LRG or Neff, and what are you guys looking for at Mad Engine?
Just what I think the both of you just mentioned, we're looking for not duplicative businesses. We're looking for like Fifth Sun, not so much a brand, but a wonderful company
yeah,
that had a huge, robust merch on demand and print on demand business, the leaders in the industry. So instead of us trying to start it from scratch, we are private equity company, Platinum bought them, merged us, and now we have that whole, we can run the whole part of that whole business from brick and mortar to print on demand. So that's the kind of things. And then new categories where we're not in. Just, anything out there that is a standalone. Mighty Fine was a brand we had purchased because they were so strong in the juniors business and had such a name. And Mad Engine was known for men. So that was like a natural add-on. So we're looking for companies that are additions that make us just a more broad overall company, and ones that have a good relationships. That's the one part that is very important, that we really make sure that who we are looking at has great relationships with retail and in the industry, in licensing or whatever part, because that could trip you up so much by having a bad rap on somebody you're acquiring. So we're looking for that.
I think now we found a running theme, because Vinny hit on it, Julie hit on it, now you hit on it. It's growth and diversity. Even Michael Rinzler, augmentive new kinds of business. Michael, you find these kind of great augmentive opportunities. How do you determine whether to keep the operating entity or integrate it, like Cindy had talked about earlier? How do you determine what to integrate and how to go about that process?
Yeah, I think the answer is it just depends. A lot of it is on, the specific type of company, and a lot of it is timing, right? So, like as an example, I'll use my own with Wicked Cool. I talked about, we integrated pretty quickly because as soon as we finished the deal, we saw, there were so many duplications and so many kind of, benefits from Jazzware's infrastructure that we could take advantage of. And we were very open to it because we thought it would, make us better a lot quicker as a company, versus like on our Kelly Toy or our Squishmallows deal, we haven't integrated as quickly because we have this little, maybe it was Cole a couple of years ago, and then, Jonathan Kelly brought it as an emerging diamond, and now it's exploding into something that we're all obviously super excited about. But, you don't want to interrupt the business, right? So you have to look at what's the right thing to do at the right time, right? So some things where it made sense, like they didn't have a big marketing department, right? So we were utilizing Jazzware's bigger infrastructure on the marketing side of things, but we're not going to, mess with kind of the factories that have been doing a great job of producing the product, or, some of their development team and the sales force. So it really is kind of a case by case basis. And, as I said earlier, we've been fortunately, as we've grown, that we've been able to keep all the talent from these companies. And that also makes it a lot easier versus, when Vince was talking about buying a distressed company where sometimes, it makes sense to immediately make cuts and kind of be more efficient. We haven't had to, fortunately go through a process like that yet.
So I'm going to put out another question, and this is a little bit more focused on the toyetic, and the two questions coming up from our audience will also be toward Michael and Julie. But do you really look for the business or the brand or the talent of management? How do you get inspired by that? Like, is it the brand or the business? Like Kelly, Squishmallow, what do you look at? Go ahead, Michael, and then Julie.
Again, it's like a hybrid, right? I think similar to what Cindy talked about, we're looking for, for brands at this point, we're looking for categories that we're not in, right? Versus buying potentially another duplicative company like Wicked Cool was, to Jazzware. So it's really a little bit of, kind of a little bit of everything. It's not like, one or the other, and then you kind of weigh kind of the different priorities, right? Like in the case of Kelly Toy, clearly we saw a brand that was flourishing, right? And that was, the shining star, but there was also a great base of business that we looked to, and a category of business in plush that we weren't in a mainstream way. And now we're one of the top 1 or 2, plush producers in the world. But, there might be other instances, we come across a lot of deals, especially now as people are, looking at what might happen with capital gains. Everybody's looking to do something over the next 6 months, and some of them are brand based, some of them are category based. But it's just, you've got to evaluate every deal independently for what makes sense for your company.
And that taps into, Julie, what you were saying with Cardinal. You got into the puzzles and games. With Guns, you got into the plush. But with Rubik's, it was the brand. How do you determine? Is it category? Is it brand? Is it infrastructure? Well, what are the drivers?
Look, I will say on behalf of Spin Master, it really is about the entrepreneurship of the company. And because even the principals of our company, that's how they started the business. You know what? They found air hogs and, you know what, and grew that into multiple brands and multiple businesses. So it's just, you know, we're constantly looking at everything. And so whether it's a brand, whether it's a company, whether it feels, you know, whether it fills a need that we have, or if it's just a brand in which one of our principals is very excited about. So, you know, again, we're not so tactical as much as we are, at least initially, is, you know, really just making sure that we're looking under every rock. And so there are some times when we're filling a true need within the company, and then there's others that we just want to take that chance and look and see where we can grow that business. And then, you know, certainly the thing that we have to our benefit is our, you know, our operations and, you know, our ability to, you know, have strong distribution of sales through our global sales force.
Excellent. So let me take two questions now. I think, or at least one of them I know is toyetic, but the first question from Janine is a branded concept that has big revenue potential, but no revenue yet, an interesting proposition for a licensee. Julie, you want to start, and then I'll let each person. Branded concept with big revenue potential, no revenue yet. Is that an interesting proposition?
Look, I think all propositions are interesting. But if I'm going to be honest, what is challenging is to, you know what, be able to justify it internally. So if you are someone who has brought this opportunity to us, you know, the financials are a big part of that, you know, evaluation. So what I would say to the audience is that you've got to be very strategic in your pitch, very convincing, very passionate. Because again, I feel like we're a very special company in the way that we do look at propositions, and passion goes a long way, you know, for us. Passion, yeah.
And then Eric adds to that same question, what if there's a ton of qualified consumer research, but still pre-revenue? Michael, what do you think of those kind of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would echo almost identical to what Julie said in this particular one. And look, it's great that there, you know, if you have research and any other evidence you can point to is always going to help make an opportunity more interesting. But it's very difficult in this landscape to really, you know, look at something pre-revenue, because there's just, I'm assuming, are we talking about a purchase even versus a licensing deal? But, you know, the way the world has changed in terms of content distribution and marketing, you know, the further along you can be with something to kind of prove out the model, the better you're always going to be in from that standpoint.
I have an example of that too. We were looking at something recently that had great potential, but the manufacturing did not exist yet. And once we got into the weeds of it and tried to figure out what the manufacturing, how much it would cost to figure out how to do the manufacturing and what the retail would be driven up to, what retail would be so high that we backed out of it. So I think, you know, you have to have some revenue to prove the concept, you know, because it could trip you up on the manufacturing.
Especially if it's a new product, like because of our relationship with Daymond John and things we see from Shark Tank, we're constantly seeing new products versus new brands or concepts. And a lot of the time, like you said, Cindy, the creator has a great idea. It would be a great product, but you can't make it cost effectively to compete against the other things that are out there. So another question that we just got, and we talked about augmented business opportunities and new categories, Michael. For all of you, the question is, does it only mean new categories of products, or what about new geographies? Acquiring a company, I guess, where they can add to your channels of distribution, or I guess here, territories of distribution. Cindy, you're up. Why don't you start with that? I'm going to let each person chime in on international.
I think I think it's good to keep our eye out for new geography, but once again, the infrastructure to be able to handle that, you have to be prepared for that infrastructure. So I think it's a big question. I think you really have to be at a level where that's not going to get in front of, you know, the great company you acquired internationally. Can you handle that infrastructure of an international company? And I've seen that in my past too, where we love the idea of going somewhere new, but the cost of going somewhere new was so prohibitive once you got into it that it's a big question. So I'd say, yes, we are looking, but and we have a desire, but it has to be the right fit.
Well, this predates you, but I remember going back maybe even more than 5 or 6 years when Mad Engine acquired Extreme out of Canada, and Angelina's company, and that brought them a whole world of new Canadian opportunities.
Yeah, that was an amazing one. Yeah.
Michael, how about you? Is it new categories, or what about new geography, new channels?
Yeah, I mean, look, definitely new categories, but, you know, again, it just has to make sense. And sometimes when it doesn't make sense, we'll just start it ourselves, right? Like we did on the costume side of the business. But, you know, as far as new geographies, yeah, that's definitely something that we're open to. You know, as we continue to grow and evolve globally, you know, more likely that it would be something on kind of the sales and distribution side, probably. But, you know, if somebody's got a great brand, you know, that happens to be based internationally, that's definitely something, you know, that we would take a hard look at. But we're very open to it. But again, like Cindy said, there are a lot of regulations, legalities, and different things that, you know, that you have to take into account that sometimes make it tougher, but it's nothing that we shy away from.
Excellent. More questions are coming in. I want to turn back to Vinny, and Vinny, tell us in some of your experience and some of the deals you've done, give us like one great success story, or one great and don't say what it is, a failure story or a deal that you thought was great and you pulled out of, maybe.
Sure. So I think one of the things for us is identifying brands that have some sort of critical mass existing. I think this touches a little on the earlier question as well, where they've got an anchor category, and let's call some anchor retail partnerships that can validate converting the business into a place which is looking for an operating business like that, or into a licensed strategy. We have bought brands in the past, one time, which had incredible mass across a number of different categories, but it became diluted because what happened is so many licensees were coming to the table with large guarantees to do anything. It was a clothing company, but all of a sudden we were making champagne and cigarette lighters and car rims and everything else. And what happened is, over a very short amount of time, I'm sure some of you can surmise which brand this was, the brand equity was diluted, and the message to the consumer was also diluted, and the brand was basically worthless at the end. And I think one has to be careful not to pump and dump these things through different strategies where you can allocate resources to maintain the brand DNA in the face of the consumer, and to also control the design quality across multiple geographies and categories. So that's a big red flag, is to make sure for that. For us, I think one of the keys to this model of how we acquire things is through that critical mass. We look at these assets as an apartment building. We don't like to head into an acquisition of an apartment building until we've got a significant number of those units rented to great credit customers. I think otherwise our particular model doesn't work. And when you bringing in an operator who's interested in participating, obviously we need this process through the acquisition to be as seamless as possible. Acquiring floor space in today's retailers, whether it's digital or especially brick and mortar, is super hard. It's even harder to reacquire it. So if we lose this floor space, if we lose the momentum at retail during this transition, it can be a disaster for the asset. On the flip side, we've bought brands where the key operator was able to go in, bring in the personnel, like Michael was talking about, who are experts. So we cut the learning curve out. We were able to add the operating partner's expertise, so it didn't duplicate, but it fit right into the glove they were wearing. And they were able to acquire not only inventory off the floor, but also work in process in the respective supply chain, so that no deliveries were delayed, and that basically the new operator had a seamless transition. And then we were able to strategize into international and other categories. But really the key is establishing the brand for what it is, or reestablishing it, and then looking at all the things we all love to do, which is the licensing and the joint ventures internationally, et cetera.
And that's the fun stuff. What are you talked about red flags, landmines. Michael, Cindy, what are the red flags? What are the things that you guys always look to stay away from, or what's the warning sign for you? Julie, whoever wants to chime in, what are the red flags? What are the warning signs?
Egos at another company, that you're going to have to tiptoe around someone during the acquisition or during, when it's finally merging. That one's a really tough one. So you have to make sure there's synergy between the like-mindedness of the two companies, and, have an understanding of who's going to go to 30,000 feet and who's going to stay in the weeds. And I just feel like that's one of the biggest obstacles and warning signs that we look for.
Michael, what about you guys? What do you stay away from?
Yeah, I would just say that, when you start on a deal and go through due diligence, it's kind of like dating, right? So you really get to know the other party pretty well, and not only ego, which is a really important one, but you just get a sense of, transparency, and a lot of this is, hey, do we believe in the vision and the future of this business? Do we believe that these numbers are real, and projections and things like that? Because once the dating period is over, you're going straight to the wedding, right? So it's you've got to make sure that the future is going to be as it appears that it's going to be.
So well said.
You've done this a few times. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh no, I just was going to add, Cindy, I love the ego, because that certainly does play into it, and for us, it's really about the DNA of the company. And so one of the best examples I can give is when we acquired Gund. Gund was established in 1898 and has been a family, operated business for, 123 years. So, that was a really big decision that we had to look in, because taking what is a family structured business and has a solid reputation within the industry, making sure that their DNA was going to fit inside, our DNA, and it's a big feat, to take that on and to bring those type of companies together.
Excellent. So one thing, Cindy, you had mentioned Fifth Sum and Mighty Fine and print on demand. One of our questions here, and Vinny, you mentioned e-commerce. One of our questions here from Anna Maria was, how are you adopting the service model and acquisition shifts to adapt to the retail landscape from brick and mortar to online? How does that affect your strategies? So I'll start with Vinny and then Cindy. How do the retail shifts, brick and mortar online, affect your acquisition strategies?
So I think one of the big criteria that's come up over the last few years is we're looking for a percentage of e-commerce sales to total as a critical part of our evaluation. A brand that has no e-com sales or a very small anemic percentage to their total is a big red flag. Even if they have limited advertising budget, they still should have a digital ecosystem established. So it's very important there. There's two ways to head into this. One is you can keep the e-commerce in-house, which is very tempting because there's very long margins there, but it's very expensive. I think people think they make a lot more on e-commerce than they actually do at the end of the day. And the other trend we've seen a lot, and we've seen some acquisition money coming in from these folks, is these service providers that are out there that basically handle all of your e-commerce for you. So basically, even if you're doing $10 million a year, you're in the body of a $200 million e-commerce giant. So you're getting all of those accretive benefits. The biggest challenge we've seen between the two models, and it's the reason people don't go with the latter, is who owns the inventory becomes the argument. These service providers are just what that is. They don't want to own inventory. So the brand feels that if they have control of their own destiny, they're better off, even with higher fixed margin.
And I know some strategies that my friends at Marquee Licensing have used there, and we have some friends in that. You and I personally have some friends in that space, and Branded Online is a great company in that space. Cindy, what about you? What about the shifts in the landscape? And I'll do a little plug because in October, I'm doing another panel on print on demand, even production on demand, and eco-sustainability. But Cindy, tell us about how did these shifts in print on demand affect your strategy?
So it affects our strategy greatly. As everyone knows, last year moved the whole e-com industry up forward 10 or plus years. It's such a big part of the business now that we have to make sure that whatever we're looking at and acquiring in just our day-to-day business is e-com friendly. And exactly what Vinny says, who owns the inventory? We're not interested in acquiring pick and pack direct-to-consumer businesses at this time. We're looking to service the major retailers in their e-com because those numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So yes, it has to be something that can translate and get into retail, onto the retailer shelves. And we do take some liability, but really it's how do you do it? And that's why print on demand is so good. But it is 100% part of what we're looking for, how that translates right now.
Excellent. But before we wrap, and I'm going to go to each of you for some final words, some conclusions, words of wisdom, I just wanted to address a few other questions. Somebody asked, how can we get in touch with you? If you reach out to me, Steven, S-T-E-V-E-N, at The Brand Liaison, L-I-A-I-S-O-N, Steven at thebrandliaison.com. I'll introduce you to each of our presenters and speakers. Doug asked a question about bringing costs down, and Rhonda has a potential new brand. Reach out to me. We'll address those. So let's go back to our panel. Those of you who have seen me before know I like to end with some final notes, some final words of wisdom, advice that our panelists can give to our listeners. Julie, let's start us off. Can you give us some final advice, Julie, words of wisdom?
Yeah, and I will just say that I feel consistent of each of us on the panel today have said some of the same things, and it really is like 5 key points. And that first is to determine what's missing from your, portfolio overall, and then also doing your homework and not just taking, a brand or a business at face value, but really, digging deep to ensure you've got all the facts. And then also look at how it fits across all lines of your business so that you can maximize the ROI. And then ensure you have the proper resources, internally to, support it. Because there's a lot of companies that take brands or, other companies and they just sit on them and they don't do anything with it. And I think it's really key to make sure that you have the team to grow it forward. And I also say from Spin Master point of view, you don't want to lose the DNA of the company or the brand, that you've acquired. So.
And that's great advice from the buyer side too. Do your due diligence, make sure you bring the returns that you want and you have the resources. And for the seller side, it's the opposite. Those are the things that the buyers are going to be looking for. Cindy, share with us some final words of wisdom.
I have 2 big ones. One is retain talented people. If you do an acquisition, retain the people that have the talent. Do whatever you can to keep them there, because to try to do that learning curve is going to put you down the road too long. And there is some magic to the talent of the people that started that company or that made that company who it is. And the other thing, which we all know, is in this business, it's relationships. So many of these deals come from relationships. Rin's had a great example of a relationship. People find out who we are. Some of these deals are done at Comic-Con or at, a trade show or at a bar, at least the initial conversation. So this is a relationship business. Keep your relationships good.
Excellent. Great advice. Michael, some final advice for buyers and sellers?
Yeah, I'll do sellers since Julie kind of did buyers. So I'd say on the seller side, like it's really important that you recognize what matters to you, right? Like for everybody, it's different. There's no right or wrong answers. For some people, it might be a certain amount of money. For some people, it could be a multiple. For other people, it might be the right fit. So, a lot of people are going to come at you. Bankers are going to come at you. But do this thing at the right time for the right reason when you're looking to sell a company or a brand. Because again, once you walk down the aisle together, like there's no turning back. So that would be my advice for people looking to sell.
Great. And Vinny, words of wisdom. Who should be reaching out to you after this webinar?
Sure. I think one of the big things, and I agree, there's been a lot of similarities between what we're all saying, is you need a core business that's got some sort of critical mass to build from. Vetting these things has to be done through multiple angles. You've got to meet with the existing team and the internal operations. You've got to meet with the retailers they're selling to make sure what they're telling you is real, and the supply chain as well. Obviously, we've touched on it, but really no one needs anything right now that's duplicative. It's more complementary. And finally, where is the growth going to come from? Because when you buy something, you can't just sit on it. It can't stay where it is. So whether it's international, digital, or category growth, physical retailing and the number of doors right now is compressing like we've never seen before and continues to do so. So where you're losing doors here in the United States, you've got to find the volume and the growth somewhere. So whether it's international or through a category or through digital formats, that growth has got to be planned for, and it really needs to be planned for well prior to walking down the aisle, as Michael said.
Phenomenal advice. And my final words of wisdom, if you're looking to sell your company, you're looking to acquire a brand, reach out to me anytime. We know of things that are quietly on the market, but I'll just share with you my advice, my thoughts, and my input. I want to thank each of you, Michael, Cindy, Julie, Vinny. This was phenomenal. Drop the mic. Thank you all for being here. If we didn't get to your questions, email me. Thank you all. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice chatting, everybody.
Thank you. It was fun. Thanks.
Love having you guys.